Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You are watching X11 Installation and Configuration. As Linux power users, administrators, and Linux Plus certification candidates, we use and must become masters of the Linux command line. This is a necessity as you may encounter servers that don't bother to load a graphical environment at all, plus some troubleshooting and administration tools must be run from the command line. And then there are those times when a user's graphical interface has decided to take a temporary hiatus. The point is that we can't always rely on the GUI to be there when we want or need it. Windows and Mac were the first entrants into the graphical desktop environment race. The windows, the icons, the customizable backgrounds all conspired to make computing fun and more productive for the masses. Linux was admittedly a little late to the party, but in my opinion has made impressive strides in a relatively short period of time. While much of the time you'll simply install your operating system and have things magically configured, every administrator knows that there are times when things go terribly, inexplicably wrong. And it's at these times that you have to roll up your sleeves and dive into the behind-the-scenes configuration that can get things back on track. So in this lesson, we'll talk about the Linux GUI environment, the X window system, which most of the time is simply referred to as X. Then we'll talk about the different configuration tools available. Next we'll get into the details of how to configure X and conclude with a look at configuring X fonts. Let's move on to the next slide, which presents an overview of the Linux GUI environment. So we know that X is Linux's graphical user environment, or GUI. But X handles more than just the display options like video card settings. It is composed of several other hardware components that work with the display, including the mouse and the keyboard. The Linux GUI works with three components. You have the X server, which is responsible for drawing windows on the screen, but you also have the mouse again and the keyboard. I initially wondered why X was called a server, but that's because it can display output locally as well as on any other network system that also runs X. And there are three different types of X servers. The first is X86, which is an early system that isn't used much today. You may find it on systems that need an old or odd driver support. The next is X.org.X11, which is probably the one that most users will have. Now it is based on X86, but it differs in configuration file naming and default font locations. The last type is Accelerated X, which was made by Graphics. Now you probably won't run into this one very much either, but if you're having trouble with a particular video driver, it's one that you can give a try. But X by itself isn't enough. It provides the place to put the windows, but it doesn't control them. And that's where Window Manager comes in. We'll talk about them in more depth in a later lesson, but for now you just need to understand how it fits into the puzzle. So we've got the X server and the Window Manager, and the final piece is the desktop environment. Most will default to GNOME, but the desktop environment actually presents the GUI desktop to the user. Now this handles icon placement, wallpapers, backgrounds, and things like that. Let's take a quick look at our Fedora system to look at the GNOME desktop and some of the settings. So the entire X system again controls things like your menu's windows, the colors, etc. From the main menu, let's click on System, and then click on Preferences and Appearance. From this utility, you can change things like your background, the theme, and even controls your fonts, which we'll talk about in just a minute. As you can see here, you have different themes, and you can simply click on one to select it, and you'll see the changes applied immediately, just in terms of the colors of the windows and the menus, and things like that. I'm going to go back to our custom. And again, the same for backgrounds. There's a list of pre-installed backgrounds that come with the system, and you can also get some more backgrounds online as you see here. And again, simply clicking on one will apply the change, but I'm going to go back to the default. Now that you have a whole view of the Linux GUI and how all the components work together, let's review what the X configuration tools have to offer on the next slide. Let's head back to the presentation. Reading the various Linux support forums is an excellent learning tool for novices and experienced alike. I spent and still spend quite a bit of time doing this every week. One of the most common issues I see on the forums is related to video card drivers. Now, X has its own drivers, but sometimes card manufacturers will have drivers of their own. It's at these times when you may find yourself having to tinker with configurations. And make no mistake, configuring X is not for the faint of heart. The options in the configuration files can be confusing, and one misstep could spell disaster. Because of this, tools have cropped up that can help ease the configuration process. This won't eliminate the possibility that you'll need to manually configure a file, but it does lessen it somewhat. And to further complicate matters, there are of course different tools for different X servers. X server has its own tools, xfree86 -configure, or if you have X11, it's xorg -configure. What these tools do is query the hardware and it produces a configuration file. For xfree86, it's located in root xf86 config.new, or for X11, it's located in root also, and the name of the file is xorg.conf.new. Now there are also tools for certain distributions. For Fedora, for instance, or other Red Hat derivatives, there is the Display Settings tool, which you can access by typing system-config-display at the command prompt. But there's also a graphical tool. xfree86 also had its own tool, which was called xf86 CFG, and that was for 4.x. X11's tool similarly was named xorg CFG. Now both of these have been That just tells us that we're using a virtual machine. That's what VirtualBox is. And you'll see the same information for the device, which would be normally the monitor. And again, it's just VirtualBox information. For the screen section, it's titled Display, and that shows our color depth. The current mode is 1024 by 768, and we've got some other identifier information, followed by in section. Now let's switch to xorg.conf.d. I'll type in cd space xorg.conf.d and hit enter. Let's type in ls to see the contents of this directory, which I'm thinking won't be very extensive. And as you can see, we have a keyboard configuration file, and this is just some VirtualBox information that we don't have to worry about. Let's take a look at the keyboard configuration file. Again, let's type in cat space, and we'll just enter the name of the file, 00-system-setup-keyboard.conf and hit enter. And what we have for the keyboard is an identifier, some other information including model number, we've got the US keyboard layout, and we've got some options for terminate. Okay, let's head back to the presentation. The last section required for both X11 and X386.4.x is the server layout section. Think of it as sort of a catch-all for all other sections of the X configuration file. It usually lists the screen, the mouse, and the keyboard. The section name, again, is server layout. You use identifier to indicate a single or multiple displays. Then you have the screen and you have the two input devices, the mouse and the keyboard, followed by in section. Before we move on, I'd like to reiterate that for certification purposes, you must understand the various X servers and configuration files and settings. But more recent Linux releases may be using other tools to handle X server configuration. Okay, moving on. There is a tool called XDYP-INFO that will give you all types of technical information about your monitor. Now, I'll warn you that this is a file that is extremely technical, so some of it may not be that easy to decipher. And similarly, if you wanted information about a specific window, you could use the command XWININFO. From the terminal, you type the command and then move the mouse to a window and click. Let's go back to our terminal window and give these a try. Okay, first let's clear our screen with the clear command. And I'm going to switch back to my home directory by just typing in cd. Now let's type in XDPYINFO. Let's make sure we have that spelled correctly, XDPYINFO, and hit enter. Now if we scroll through, let's go back up to the top first. You can see tons of information, some of which will make absolutely no sense, but it's still a good idea to just peruse through here and take a look at some of the information. You got things that you may recognize, like here for the first screen, and in this case the only screen. You've got dimensions, resolution, window, and other information. Again, you can spend some time on your own going through this, but for now we just need to understand the command and what it will do. Now let's try out the next one. But first I'm going to open another window. Let's just open our home directory here by double-clicking, and we'll move that over here to the side. Bring that one back forward. Okay, now let's type in XWININFO. Let's make sure we spelled it correctly and hit enter. Now let's click tools, configuration options, and programs can change in small ways or drastically from one release to the next. We saw an example of that in this section. As with Fedora 13, the X configuration files have changed. Still, in preparation for the Linux Plus certification exam, this is material that we really need to understand. In this lesson, we review the Linux GUI environment and its components, the X server, the desktop manager, and the desktop environment. We then covered the configuration tools that help you gather information about your display system's hardware and settings. Next, we covered how to configure both X and X's fonts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.